What if the person you trusted most, the one who spoke softly, smiled warmly, and offered a helping hand to everyone in need, was the very same person responsible for a death so calculated, so cold, it left even seasoned investigators stunned? This is the story of Gina Martins, a woman celebrated as a community leader, a mentor to the young, and a beacon of stability. But beneath her calm, graceful exterior, she carried a secret so devastating that no one, not her closest friends, not her family, and certainly not her neighbors, could have imagined the role she played in the crime that would shatter their town. Tonight, we peel back the layers of a carefully constructed double life. By the end, you'll see how appearances can deceive, how the line between protector and predator can blur, and how a killer can hide in plain sight. Gina Martins was 42 years old when the case first began to unfold. On the surface, she was everything a person could hope to be. Intelligent, composed, charitable. She had built her reputation as an advocate for local charities, frequently organizing fundraisers and volunteering for causes that gained her admiration from virtually everyone around her. She lived in the heart of a mid-sized town, a place where people knew one another's names, where families grew up together, and where secrets rarely survived for long. But Gina's secret had lived with her for years, hidden behind practiced smiles and carefully chosen words. The story begins with a tragedy, the death of her younger brother, Daniel Martins. Daniel was in his late 30s, a man whose life had not been as polished as Gina's. Unlike his sister, Daniel had struggled to keep steady work. He lived in the shadow of her accomplishments, drifting between odd jobs, often leaning on her for financial help. Some in the community pitied him. Others dismissed him as lazy. Gina, however, always defended him. At least, that's what people believed. The night Daniel was found dead, slumped across the worn sofa of his small apartment, shocked the community. At first glance, it seemed like an accident, a mix of alcohol and prescription pills. A man whose troubled life had finally caught up with him. But it wasn't long before investigators realized that something about the scene was off. The placement of the bottles, the angle of his body, the absence of his phone, which he never left behind. And yet, as whispers began to circulate, Gina appeared every bit the grieving sister. She gave a heartfelt statement outside her home, her voice trembling with emotion as she thanked the community for their support. Reporters described her as dignified in grief, a woman of resilience and grace. But here's the question. Why was Gina at the center of everything from the very beginning? Why did her name keep surfacing in subtle, almost imperceptible ways? In police reports, in witness statements, in hushed conversations behind closed doors. At first glance, it seemed like a simple family tragedy, but as investigators would later learn, the truth was anything but simple. And that's where the story takes its first turn, because while the town mourned Daniel, clues quietly emerged that pointed to a far darker reality, one that would unravel Gina's carefully built reputation, piece by piece. Long before Daniel's death made headlines, the Martins family carried a complicated history, one that, for years, remained carefully tucked away, only whispered about by those who thought they knew them best. Gina and Daniel had grown up in the same small town where the story would later unfold. Their parents were strict, their expectations high. Gina was the golden child, excelling in school, never giving her parents a reason to worry. Daniel, on the other hand, stumbled. Teachers described him as distracted, rebellious, uninterested in academics. As adults, those roles seemed to follow them like shadows. By the time Gina was in her 30s, she had earned the respect of nearly everyone in town. She was admired not just for her work ethic, but for her composure. People said she was the kind of woman you could trust with anything: a secret, a responsibility, a child. When someone needed advice, they went to Gina. When an organization needed a leader, they called Gina. Daniel, meanwhile, lived in her shadow. He hopped between jobs, carried debts he couldn't seem to shake, and often relied on his sister to bail him out. Outwardly, Gina seemed endlessly patient with him. "He's my brother," she would say with a gentle smile. "Family takes care of family." But behind closed doors, things weren't always as simple as they appeared. Several friends recalled moments when Daniel complained bitterly about Gina's control. He said she never truly helped him without reminding him of his failures. He accused her of looking down on him, of making him feel small even when she offered assistance. One acquaintance remembered Daniel saying, "To everyone else, she's perfect. To me, she's a prison." Investigators would later revisit those statements with fresh eyes, because while Gina portrayed herself as the patient sister, quietly carrying the burden of a wayward sibling, there were subtle cracks in that image. A former co-worker described how Gina spoke of Daniel in strangely conflicting ways. At times, she defended him passionately, almost too much, dismissing criticism with a quick wave of her hand. At other times, she would sigh heavily, as if exhausted, and mutter that her brother was a constant disappointment. Even her financial records told a story. Months before Daniel's death, large withdrawals from Gina's accounts were traced to payments covering his rent and bills, but then, suddenly, the support stopped. Daniel confided to a neighbor that his sister had cut him off, claiming she was done with his mistakes. That change was significant because it happened just weeks before Daniel died. And then there was something else, a rumor, quiet but persistent, that Gina and Daniel had argued fiercely the night before his body was found. No one could confirm exactly what was said, but multiple people reported hearing raised voices through the thin walls of Daniel's apartment building. When questioned later, Gina dismissed the idea with practiced calm. "Siblings argue," she said, "but I loved my brother. I would never hurt him." Still, the whispers wouldn't stop, because in a town where Gina was admired for her perfection, her brother's death was beginning to cast a shadow she couldn't quite control. Investigators started asking themselves a new question. Was Gina the patient, devoted sister everyone thought she was, or was she something else entirely? That question would become the thread that unraveled everything. The night of Daniel Martin's death began like so many others, unremarkable, quiet, almost forgettable. Witnesses described him as being in relatively good spirits earlier that evening. A cashier at a nearby convenience store recalled Daniel buying a pack of cigarettes, chatting idly about the weather. A neighbor mentioned hearing the faint sound of music playing from his apartment around dinner time. Nothing, in those hours, suggested the tragedy that was about to unfold. According to the official timeline, Daniel was last seen alive at around 9 o'clock in the evening. He had returned home, carrying a plastic bag with his cigarettes, a cheap bottle of wine, and a microwavable dinner. It was, by all accounts, an ordinary night. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Shortly after midnight, residents in the building reported something strange. A loud thud, the faint scrape of furniture moving, and faintly, what sounded like muffled voices raised in argument. At the time, no one thought much of it. Apartment buildings are noisy places. People fight, life goes on. But those small disturbances would later become crucial puzzle pieces. When Daniel's body was discovered the following morning, the scene didn't sit right with first responders. His apartment door was locked from the inside, yet the arrangement of objects in the room suggested someone else had been there. The wine bottle on the coffee table had been wiped clean of prints. The microwave dinner sat untouched on the counter, still in its plastic wrapping, and Daniel's phone, his lifeline, his only real connection to the world, was missing. The initial ruling leaned toward overdose. The combination of alcohol and prescription medication seemed to explain the sudden collapse, but the deeper investigators looked, the less sense it made. Daniel's toxicology showed traces of a drug he had never been prescribed. His hands bore faint defensive marks, scratches across the knuckles, as if he had tried, even briefly, to ward someone off. And then came the most unsettling detail. Under Daniel's fingernails, investigators found traces of skin. Who had been with him that night? The evidence pointed to a struggle, brief but violent, before the fatal dose took effect. This was no accident. It was a crime. Naturally, suspicion turned toward the people closest to Daniel, and at the top of that list was Gina Martins. On the surface, Gina's grief seemed genuine. She wept publicly, spoke of her brother's troubled but beautiful soul, and even offered to assist police in any way she could. Yet behind closed doors, cracks in her story began to appear. Her timeline didn't quite match. She claimed to have been home all night, but her car was spotted leaving her driveway around 11 o'clock. A local gas station attendant remembered a woman matching her description buying fuel just before midnight, and phone records revealed a call from her landline to Daniel's apartment at 10:45, a call she denied making. When pressed, Gina explained it away with calm precision. Perhaps someone mistook another woman for her. Perhaps the call was accidental. I had nothing to do with my brother's death, she told investigators firmly. And for a while, her composure worked. She was convincing. She looked the part of the grieving sister. But then came the moment that would shift the case entirely. During a second search of Daniel's apartment, tucked between the cushions of the sofa where his body was found, police uncovered something chilling. A thin gold bracelet. Not Daniel's. Not something that belonged in his apartment. It was engraved with the single initial G. For investigators, the meaning was unmistakable. Gina Martins had been there. But why? Why would a respected, admired woman orchestrate the death of her own brother? That question lingered like smoke, and as investigators pulled the threads tighter, they realized this case was far more complex than anyone had imagined. Because Gina wasn't just Daniel's grieving sister, she was something else entirely. Detectives now had more than suspicions. They had a lead. The gold bracelet with the engraved initial G wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol, almost like a signature, left behind by mistake. When investigators showed it to colleagues at Gina's workplace, their reactions were immediate. Everyone recognized it. Gina wore that bracelet nearly every day. A delicate piece gifted to her years ago by her late husband. When confronted, Gina didn't flinch. She claimed she had misplaced the bracelet months earlier. Perhaps it had fallen into Daniel's couch during a visit. Perhaps he had borrowed it, though no one could explain why. Her explanations were smooth, practiced, even believable on the surface. But detectives weren't satisfied. Behind closed doors, they began reconstructing Gina's life piece by piece. What they found was a carefully crafted facade. On paper, Gina Martins was a respected figure, a devoted community leader, successful professional, and doting sister who had endured unimaginable loss when her husband passed away. She attended charity events, spoke passionately about the importance of family, and was admired by neighbors for her poise and kindness. Yet beneath the polished exterior, inconsistencies began to emerge. Her finances told a different story. Bank records revealed unusual cash withdrawals in the weeks leading up to Daniel's death, thousands of dollars at a time, vanishing with no clear purpose. Witnesses came forward with troubling accounts. Sightings of Gina in parts of town she had no reason to be in, late at night, often in the company of people with dangerous reputations. And then there were the phone records. Gina's calls painted a disturbing picture. Frequent late-night conversations with numbers linked to known criminals, burner phones traced back to anonymous buyers, and a flurry of activity in the hours just before Daniel died. Investigators were no longer asking if Gina had been involved. The question had shifted to why. The answer arrived in fragments. A colleague at Gina's law firm remembered hushed arguments between her and Daniel, always revolving around money. A bartender recalled seeing them together weeks earlier, voices raised, Daniel shouting something about exposing her lies. Even a neighbor recalled Daniel storming out of Gina's house one evening, muttering that he couldn't protect her anymore. It was becoming clear. Daniel had known something dangerous. But what was it? The breakthrough came from a source no one expected. A small storage facility on the edge of town. Surveillance footage showed Gina entering her rented unit less than 24 hours after Daniel's death. She stayed inside for almost 2 hours, leaving with a large black duffel bag. When investigators obtained a warrant, what they uncovered inside the unit shifted the entire investigation. Inside were stacks of cash, fake identification cards, burner phones, and, most chilling of all, documents linking Gina to a network of fraudulent businesses and offshore accounts. It wasn't just side money. It was an empire of corruption, hidden in plain sight, worth millions. Suddenly, the image of Gina Martins, the grieving, respectable sister, dissolved. What remained was something far darker. A woman living a double life. Daniel, it seemed, had stumbled too close to the truth. He had threatened to expose her. And for Gina, exposure meant everything would collapse. Her career, her reputation, her fortune. So she silenced him. The investigation had enough to draw a picture, but proving it was another matter. Gina was meticulous, careful, always one step ahead. Every piece of evidence seemed circumstantial. Every witness account just shy of concrete. Yet detectives pressed on, determined to unravel the truth. And while Gina smiled publicly, playing the role of the grieving sister, investigators knew the mask was slipping. They were just waiting for the crack that would break her open completely. But no one, not even the detectives, could predict the shocking way this story would end. As weeks passed, Gina's calm exterior never cracked. At vigils for her brother, she stood front and center, offering heartfelt speeches, her voice quivering with carefully placed sorrow. The community rallied behind her, seeing only a grieving sister wronged by tragedy. But behind closed doors, investigators were tightening the noose. A forensic sweep of Daniel's home revealed a partial fingerprint on a shattered glass table. It wasn't enough to convict, but when analyzed, it matched Gina's. She claimed she had been there days earlier, helping him clean. Logical, plausible. But detectives felt the weight of the puzzle pieces aligning. The real turning point came from something Gina never anticipated: betrayal from within her own circle. One of the men she had dealt with during her clandestine ventures, a mid-level fixer facing his own charges, cut a deal. He claimed Gina had orchestrated everything, that Daniel had threatened to go public, and that she had decided to handle it. He even provided texts, coded, but damning, suggesting she was arranging the silencing of her brother. Still, prosecutors hesitated. A jury could see Gina as the grieving sister and dismiss it all as a smear. They needed something undeniable. And then, fate delivered it in the most unexpected way. On a quiet Thursday evening, Gina was seen leaving her house with that same black duffel bag she had retrieved from the storage unit. A local mugger, desperate and reckless, attempted to rob her in the alleyway near her car. The struggle was brief but violent. Police arrived within minutes after a passerby called in the assault. The mugger was shot dead. Gina was shaken but unharmed. On the surface, she was a victim, but when police secured the scene and examined the bag, its contents told a very different story. Inside were documents implicating her directly in offshore accounts, detailed plans of fraudulent businesses, and, most incriminating of all, a handwritten note in Daniel's handwriting. It was a draft of a letter he had intended to send to the authorities, outlining everything he knew about Gina's schemes. She hadn't destroyed it. She had kept it, perhaps as a twisted trophy, or perhaps out of arrogance that no one would ever find it. With the evidence now in plain sight, Gina's world collapsed instantly. She was arrested that night. As neighbors watched in disbelief, the woman they admired, the elegant professional, the devoted sister, was led away in handcuffs, her mask shattered beyond repair. But the story did not end there. In the courtroom months later, Gina remained composed, even as prosecutors laid out the chilling truth. Gina Martins had lived a double life. To the world, she was a figure of respect. In the shadows, she was a manipulator, a fraudster, and, ultimately, killer. And in a final twist, her composure cracked only once, not when the guilty verdict was read, but when the prosecutor revealed Daniel's draft letter aloud in court. His words, raw and unfiltered, were his final act of defiance, ensuring that even in death, his voice exposed the truth about his sister's double life. The jury didn't need long. Gina was sentenced to life in prison, her carefully constructed world gone forever. The respected figure, the grieving sister, revealed instead as the orchestrator of her own brother's death. The double life of a killer, hidden in plain sight, finally unmasked. This case forces us to confront an unsettling question. How well do we truly know the people closest to us? To her community, Gina Martins was a beacon of respect and elegance. To her brother, Daniel, she was family, blood. But beneath the surface, she lived a double life. And when the truth threatened to come out, she chose silence through violence. And yet, was Gina always the monster? Or was she shaped by something darker, something no one ever saw? The lines between love, loyalty, and betrayal blur until they are almost indistinguishable. What do you think? Did justice truly uncover the whole story? Or are there still pieces of Gina's life that remain hidden in the shadows? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this story as haunting as I did, don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories every day. Until next time, stay watchful, because the most dangerous lives are often the ones lived in plain sight.